She emerged from the tall autumn grasses in a rush. There was blood staining her gown. Terror flickered in her gaze. For a fleeting moment, even the Nebraska breeze appeared to hold its breath. She fled, as if the very earth beneath the plains yearned to pull her under. Her pale gown was ripped, strands of hair clung to her cheeks. She kept glancing back over her shoulder as though pursuit was near enough to feel its hot breath on her skin. Her name was Emma Klein, 24 years old. Petite, agile, resilient beyond her slender frame, yet not resilient enough to escape a man like Harlan Voss. Most folks in Cheyenne whispered that Harlan had entered the world with a golden cradle. Others murmured the cradle had been pilfered. Regardless, he was the sort of wealthy ranch owner who assumed every desire of his was rightfully claimed, including Emma. And on this afternoon, he had last driven her to the edge, compelling her to flee. The sunlight scorched her like flames. The open land was so still she could hear the thrum of her own heartbeat. Then came the noise that almost buckled her legs. A gunshot echoed from behind, crisp, vicious, near. The shot skimmed her thigh and hurled her into the soil. She struck the ground with force. Earth puffed into the air. Air tore from her lungs. Yet she hauled herself forward on quivering elbows and continued to inch along. She refused to weep. She refused to cry out. Every fiber of her being urged surrender, but her spirit declared otherwise. In the distance she glimpsed a row of wooden posts, a lean-to, a small homestead, wisps of smoke curling from a smithy. Signs of life, of possible aid, of someone who might at least deter Harlan long enough for her to regain her footing. She wasn't certain if anyone in Nebraska possessed the courage to confront him, but in that instant she was prepared to stake her existence on an unknown soul. She hauled herself across the grit until her palms encountered straw strewn over a farmstead yard. Her sight dimmed, the surroundings whirled, and then she noticed him. Elias Thorne, 50 years of age, sturdy build, silver threading his whiskers, weathered complexion. A homesteader who also forged metal for much of the territory. He was perched next to a bundle of straw, a mallet still gripped in his fist. A figure who seemed hewn from the soil around him. He rose the instant he witnessed her collapse. He traversed the yard with deliberate, unhurried strides, the sort that spoke of a soul acquainted with fearlessness. She attempted to lift herself. She tried to caution him that Harlan drew near. All that escaped was a murmur. "Please, help me." Elias crouched at her side. His gaze sharpened as he spotted the crimson seeping through the cloth by her thigh. He laid a palm close to the injury, and Emma drew in a sharp breath of agony, but she did not recoil. Not now, not with her survival teetering on a razor's edge. She had no notion whether this fellow was an angel or a simpleton, only that he formed the lone barrier between her and Harlan. He peered toward the skyline where clouds of dust billowed from Harlan's posse. Then he turned back to her, his expression inscrutable. And now the query that will shape all that follows. Can a man who shuns entanglement in strife rescue a woman who arrives bearing only chaos? Elias hoisted Emma lightly as if she were a bundle of grain and bore her into the shelter beside the smithy. The flare from that hearth radiated like the mouth of perdition, yet oddly it deepened her chills. He eased her onto a layer of fresh straw and grasped the flask of bourbon stowed by the workbench. She feebly waved his hand aside, but her efforts scarcely disturbed the particles in the air. "Easy there," he murmured. "Sip this or the blood loss claims you." His tone was even, unwavering, as if haste had no place in his world. Emma swallowed a bit and hacked fiercely. The fire scorched her gullet like a blow. She dabbed her lips and fixed him with a fierce stare. I didn't seek shelter here to be mended by some unknown hand. She uttered it with conviction, though her fingers trembled. Elias arched an eyebrow. You arrived because your path ended. Then he parted the frayed material by her thigh and beheld the slug embedded in inflamed tissue. He exhaled slowly. This needs removed at once. Delay it, and the limb is lost. Emma bolted upright. Her eyes widened. What do you intend for me? Her words fractured, not from dread of Harlan, but from dread of the torment. Elias drew a hunting blade from the flames, the edge steaming with warmth. He buffed it once on a fresh rag and explained, "The projectile sits near the top. I'll need to part the flesh slightly, merely to extract it. It'll bite fiercely, but it'll preserve you. Out on these plains, we've managed it this way long before Nebraska earned its title. Then I'll stem the flow before it overtakes you." In these vast reaches, the line between endurance and demise often hinged on one resolute soul, bold enough to act. She fixed on the steaming edge, her breaths catching. Every sinew in her tensed. Then the phrase escaped her unbidden. "Wait, you mean to insert that into me?" Elias didn't flinch. "It'll pass swiftly. Stay put, or matters worsen in a hurry." She sought to withdraw. Her heel scraped the earth. Her palms balled into knots. She had been dashing for hours, resisting for days, and now her vigor ebbed, but not her resolve, not her spark. She met his stare directly, as if challenging him to inflict harm. "Then proceed, but should you end me, I'll shadow you to your grave." Elias nearly grinned. Nearly. Then he guided the heated edge toward her gash as the breeze bore the far-off rumble of galloping steeds sweeping the plains. And precisely as the steel met her flesh, she caught a sound that froze her pulse. Harlan was nearer than any had imagined. So what unfolds when the pursuer she dreads most arrives at the homestead before the fragment departs her form? Once the incision lay bare, Elias seized a small metal probe from beside the embers, its end aglow in the smithy's gleam. The searing tip met Emma's skin, and she released a noise blending shock and rage. Elias held firm, not harshly, just a fellow who had faced such trials too often to waver. The metal sizzled against ravaged tissue. Emma clutched a handful of his shirt and clung as if dangling from a precipice. Her breaths erupted in ragged bursts. The anguish was blinding, stark, unrelenting, but just as she teetered on unconsciousness, a stir beyond reached her ears. The deliberate creak of carriage wheels, the steady trot of mounts, muffled tones. Harlan's crew loomed so proximate that Elias tensed before she did. For the first occasion that day, Emma grasped that this unfamiliar man might bear the cost of her escape. "Don't halt," she breathed through clenched jaws. Elias kept his focus downward. Not quite. He maintained the probe's poise as perspiration traced his brow. He delved further. The cry from Emma pierced like an axe through timber, yet she held motionless. She compelled herself to. Her nails bit into his forearm, leaving imprints. "Got it," Elias grumbled. "The slug's shifting. Hang in." Elias's palm grazed her side as he anchored her, and in that peculiar instant, Emma sensed a gentleness unrelated to the smithy's blaze. A bellow arose from without, a masculine timbre, gravely ominous. "Harlan Voss, Elias Thorne, you've taken what's mine. Deliver her, and no harm befalls." Emma's heart pounded against her bones. Elias lifted his gaze to hers for a mere breath, but that breath conveyed a full resolve forming in his depths.
He steadied her thigh with one grip and thrust the probe with the other. The fragment ejected and rang against the ground. Emma inhaled as though surfacing from depths too profound. Elias snatched a clump of fresh linen and bound it to her lesion. His words fell soft. "Can you rise for a spell? Because if Harlan breaches that threshold, you'd best be upright or primed to resist." Emma propelled herself erect. Her limbs trembled like a foal's, frail yet defiant. She savored the tang of copper on her tongue. She brushed away her tears with her wrist. She wasn't finished. Beyond, the footfalls intensified, neared. Harlan summoned once more, his volume rising. "Thorn, you've one opportunity to yield the woman. Understand?" Elias rose, claimed his mallet, and inclined his head toward the entrance. He faced superior numbers and firepower, yet he had endured too long to yield his path to dread. Emma gulped, her rhythm racing. They both sensed what followed would seal their fates. Some souls select their struggles, but for Emma and Elias, this one had forced entry and settled in. And moments before Harlan's silhouette darkened the portal, permit me this. If you stood in Elias's boots, would you surrender her or wager your breath to shield her? Should you crave the tale's continuation, consider subscribing to catch the ensuing chapter. And as you're settled, pour yourself a soothing beverage, lean back, and share the hour where you are and from which corner of the earth you tune in. Harlan advanced through the threshold as if the entire plain were his domain. Grit adhered to his spurs. Perspiration dampened his neckline. A pair flanked him, weapons primed. He surveyed the space languidly, methodically, until his sight settled on Emma, upright by Elias, with that crimson-dyed rag to her thigh. "Well now," he drawled with a crooked grin, "I trek clear across and discover my intended concealed in a rival's outbuilding." Emma went rigid. Elias remained statue still. Oh, but he adjusted his stance like a steer poised to lunge. Harlan jabbed a finger her way. "Approach at once! Hear me?" Emma denied with a shake. Her timbre quavered, yet she rooted herself. "I'm not yours. Not anymore. Not ever." Harlan chuckled, a resonant, grating rumble that prickled her skin. He gestured dismissively at Elias. "Thorn, it's straightforward. You withdraw, I claim the lady, and we depart peaceably. No discord." Elias edged 1 foot ahead. Just one, sufficient to alter the room's tension. "You fired on her. You hounded her over half the plain and expect I'll permit you to depart with her. Won't occur." Harlan's grin faded. "Then discord it shall be." Then the first shot boomed, vibrating the smithy. Harlan's retainer discharged prematurely, recklessly. Elias surged, seized the heavy metal scoop by the bench, and arced it with might. The strike dislodged the firearm from his hold. The piece skidded over the planks. Emma reeled against the straw, yet held her stance, her rhythm thundering, but she denied collapse. Harlan snatched her wrist. He wrenched with such vigor she yelped. Elias pivoted swiftly, collared Harlan, and dashed him into the timber upright with a jolt that clattered the suspended implements. Harlan coughed crimson and snarled. "You think you can pilfer from me? Claim what's mine?" Elias neared up. "She's no possession, and certainly not yours." The other retainer hoisted his firearm, sighting Elias's rear. Emma perceived it first. Her air snagged. She knew another pulse could conclude the fray with a fatality, perhaps Elias's, perhaps hers. So she resorted to her sole recourse. She clutched the closest object at hand, not to battle as a warrior, merely to disrupt his line. Her frame quaked fiercely, yet she hefted the metal with a swift, frantic heave. And here's the pivot that determines all. Will Emma arc that metal and preserve Elias, or will Harlan's lead conclude the narrative here? Emma permitted no space for dread to overtake her. She arced the metal with her remaining vigor. The clang resounded through the outbuilding like a tolling chime. The gunman buckled to his haunches, stunned, the weapon tumbling as particles danced around him. Harlan paused just long enough for Elias to twist loose and propel him anew against the pillar. For the first time that day, the peril within those walls seemed to sway in their favor. The pair regarded one another, respirating heavily, the atmosphere dense with smithy haze and Ayer's fervor. Harlan lashed out first, erratic and crude, but Elias shifted like one who had weathered countless harsh seasons to fall to mere bluster. A firm strike, and Harlan sprawled in the earth. The outbuilding hushed. In that slender hush, each inhalation amplified, as if the afternoon yet pondered its survivors. Only the smithy popped faintly in the alcove. Emma lingered, the metal implement quivering in her hand, yet a blaze kindled in her eyes now, enduring, fresh. She hadn't merely survived, she had countered. Elias came at her side and eased the metal from her hold with care. He regarded her with a glint akin to esteem. "You saved me." His timbre was serene, but the sincerity rang clear. And for the first instant since fleeing Harlan, Emma sensed her heart even. Harlan moaned amid the soil. His retainers aided his rise, their resolve shattered. He scolded at Emma as if intent on raising her world. But Elias interposed. His words, low, measured, conclusive. "She's through with you. Depart and stay away." Harlan hauled himself vertical, smearing scarlet from his lips. His stare smoldered with wrath, not timidity. "This concludes nothing, Thorn. I'll bring my full force." Elias advanced a fraction to silence him. "Then fetch a cleric as well." Harlan retreated gradually, unvanquished, just scheming, and curiously that chilled the air more than prior. Emma released a long exhale she'd been holding for days. Her posture eased.
The strife seemed to ebb abruptly. Elias steadied her before descent, not as a legend, not as one staking claim, simply as a person who declined to witness another's fracture before him. He positioned her by the smithy and draped a coverlet over her frame. "You rose today. Many past lifetimes awaiting another's rescue, but you redeemed yourself. Remember that always." Emma gazed at the radiant embers and murmured, "I believed my flight stemmed from frailty." Elias denied with a tilt. "Fleeing toward liberty isn't frailty. It's the initial stride to embodying your true self. And that's the truth many overlook. At times, the world presumes to gauge your value ere you claim the right. At times, your fortitude reveals itself only when another seeks to strip it." As dusk descended over the Nebraska meadows, Emma at last felt the burden ease from her breast. Not from security, but from seizing her narrative's reins. When the final gleam faded beyond the rises, Emma noted her lesion ached less acutely. What unnerved her more was the void ahead. Liberty had gleamed vast and luminous in her thoughts. Here amid the settling particles, it merely resembled a trail unmarked. Elias strode to the barrier and readied his spare mount, the aged bay mare he seldom rode. He met her eyes with tranquil, firm regard and offered, "Come along. Evenings turn brisk here." Now allow me this reflection. Have you known an instant where you battled for your liberty, an instant where you proclaimed sufficient? If this account stirred within you, kindly endorse the piece and subscribe to encounter the forthcoming yarn. Ere you depart, join me in a deep inhalation, just a beat. And whilst present, relay in the remarks the time for you and your worldly locale. I'd cherish hearing your narrative's echo.